You never heard of Foo Fighters? Okay, well, what did you say no for? And what did he say? But anyway, yes, Foo Fighters are a pretty famous group. Well, the guy from Nirvana is with them now, or has been with them. Anyway, so I'm there waiting for them to get started, and there's a couple of young guys there from Louisiana. And I asked them about this Occupy Wall Street guy. One of the guys is an IT employee with a medical company, but they all had jobs. One was going to school, and they all had jobs. They said, we think it's pretty cool. I said, pretty cool? What are you talking about? Bunch of Marxists and anarchists and all that. He said, well, them aside, don't you hate the big banks too? One of them said, I got the student loan. I don't know if I can pay it. I said, let me ask you something, kid. When you took out the student loan, which was subsidized by me, myself, and I, that is all of you, did you think you could pay it off when you took it out? And I said, what is it about the banks? We had this discussion today in my office, I and my colleagues, and I said, the problem for the banks is this. You have to go into the bank to get a loan, or you go to the mortgage company to get a loan. But you don't actually go to the government that sets all the rules, imposes all the regulations, makes all these determinations. When you buy a home, you take out a mortgage, all those papers you have to sign, the bank's not producing them. The government's ordering them to do it, or the mortgage company to do it. So the banks are the front, the face of all those regulations, misguided left-wing policies, loans for poor people, loans for people that have bad credit. This went on for 2.5 decades. And the banks were compelled to give these loans. They were accused of redlining by John Conyers and others in a phony report from the Boston Federal Reserve. This has all been spelled out, including in my book. So everybody hates the banks. I hate the banks. And then we get to the next part with some of them. Oh, and the Jews. But let's put that aside. So the banks. And by the way, it wasn't just the Obama administration. It was part of the Bush administration, too, with the home ownership policy. And this is why we conservatives really are disgusted about government intervention. Don't intervene to promote or to demote, to give credit or discredit. The job of the Federal Reserve is to ensure sound money. That is it. No less, no more. At least that's what it's supposed to do. But the job of the Justice Department and HUD and the Treasury Department and the FHA and all the rest of them was not to promote home ownership. The job of the Justice Department is to uphold the law, to enforce it, and the Treasury Department is to be watchful and good stewards of our money and our currency. But not to push the economy this way or that way or another way through stupid policies. But, Mark, what about tax cuts? Well, that money belongs to us. I'm not saying we support the status quo, but what I am saying is when you compel banks and other lenders, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are in on it, to give loans to people who are terrible credit risks, and you give out, and the estimate is between $1 and $4 trillion in these types of loans. $1 trillion being the low end, $4 trillion being the most likely, but the high end. What happens when you have a real estate bubble and it finally busts? You have trillions of dollars in unpaid loans. And the government sits there. Oh, it's the banks. Now we got to bail out the banks. Now, in the bailing out of the banks, that's you and me bailing out the banks, we were told that they had to buy the subprime mortgages, the poisonous, toxic mortgages, whatever they were calling them. They give them different names all the time. But what did the Fed actually do? It printed money and gave the Treasury Department cash to buy equity positions in banks. They bought precious few subprime toxic loans. There were even banks that didn't want the TARP money that were compelled to take it. In other words, they were compelled to sell equity positions in their own private company to the federal government, even though they didn't need it and want it. We have Bush guys running around saying, TARP was a great success. Look at this. We made money. They don't even think about or talk about the policy ramifications. The government that has the power to nationalize banks or parts of them and automobile companies and soon student loans, you name it, is a government without limits. We have economic cycles. It's called the law of economics. The government can't change it. It can only make it worse. So Obama's out there now issuing executive orders and using Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, the same three stooges that helped get us into this problem. He's now using them, and you know what he's going to do? He's issuing executive orders to make it easier for borrowers to switch to cheaper loans, even if they have little or no equity in their homes. As long as they've been paying regularly for 6 months. They haven't missed a payment for 6 months. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Housing Finance Agency are going to step in, set rules to loosen the terms, and I'm thinking to myself, well, who are the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac? Where do they get this money from? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are underwater by the tune of tens of billions of dollars. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the president is issuing executive orders, so all of us are on the hook. All of us. We're Fannie Mae. We're Freddie Mac. We're the Federal Housing Finance Agency. These are just names. These are just buildings. These are just bureaucrats with little business cards, signs on their doors. They don't exist unless we fund it all. So now you and I are the insurer of last resort of the banks that the federal government almost destroyed, of the customers whose homes are underwater, who they've almost destroyed. You and I now are the banks. You and I now are the insurance companies. We are. Because when we say the federal government is nationalizing, that's us. We own them. When we say the federal government is assuming debt, that's us. That's you and me. Now, why is Obama doing this now? You know, he tried it before. There was a piece yesterday in the Washington Compost. Obama's efforts to aid homeowners boost housing market fall far short of goals. Yesterday's Compost was a critical plan to jumpstart the economy. President Obama pledged at the beginning of his term to boost the nation's crippled housing market, help as many as 9 million homeowners avoid losing their homes to foreclosure. So they passed this new bill, which was $50 to $60 billion, when Obama controlled both houses of Congress and the executive branch, and they spent only $2.4 billion. And they assisted only 1.7 million people out of the 9 million. In other words, the program was a disaster. So what does Obama do? I have an idea, he says. Let's not double down. Let's not triple down. Let's quadruple down. What the hell? It's not my money. I'll issue executive orders, and there I'll be the guy handing out the lollipops, if you get my drift. He'll be the guy with your money, putting you on the line, putting your children on the line, the left having already destroyed the housing market, destroying the banking system, destroying our currency, massively increasing our debt. Well, here they are again. We have a new idea. We'll subsidize all these other mortgages so people can get lower interest rates. Here's the problem, in addition to everything I've just said. If you can't afford your mortgage, it's really not because you're paying 6% on your money as opposed to 3%. For the vast majority of people, it's because you can't afford the principal. That's the truth. And when you add the principal to the insurance, to the property taxes, to the interest, it's a huge problem. So this program will have almost as much success as the other one. But he's doing it because it's politically expedient, because it doesn't cost him a nickel, because it involves bigger and bigger government. Oh, and there's one other thing I was thinking about. Or you took government money for XYZ purposes, so of course we can issue regulations. Of course we can tell XYZ what to do. And they do. That's how they get their foot in the door. That's how they argue the Commerce Clause, if you'll notice. If this administration were to shut down today, if Obama were to leave office today, we'd have a society that didn't look like it looked like 3 years ago. A government that somehow has the power to nationalize automobile industries. And by the way, that one's on George Bush. He used TARP money to subsidize GM and Chrysler in violation of the Constitution. I'm sorry, it's true. He opened the door wide and Obama sprinted through. We now have a government that believes it has the authority to nationalize our banks by buying equity positions in them, whether they like it or not. We now have a government that has, in essence, nationalized our student loan program. We now have a government that has decided that it can decide what type of companies you and I are to be paying for. Solar, wind, you name it. Complete frauds, but look at the power. It has assumed enormous power in the last 2.5, 3 years that it never had before. And so back to the BlizzCon event and these kids I was standing next to. I said to the one kid, the IT employee, he's young. I say kid because I think he was 23, 24. I said, what do you think about authority generally? He said, well, generally I'm not that excited about it. And I said, and yet, in the last 2 or 3 years, your government has assumed so much power, power it's never had before, power that's not authorized in the Constitution, power that will one day affect your liberty. And you know nothing of it. You're talking to me about the banks. You know nothing of what's been done to your Constitution, to your country, to your future. And he just stared at me. I thought to myself, how sad. But I also thought about one good thing. If much of the movement is made up of kids like that, it doesn't have a leg to stand on. I don't think it'll last years and years and years. I don't think it can. You want to know why? Its supporters are just too damn stupid.
Mark Levin.